Hello everyone, welcome to the Study Spectrum TV channel, and today we are going to start with chapter 1, Reproduction in Organisms. So students, as we all know that each and every organism can live on this earth or our planet for a certain period of time, and this period of time involves from the birth of an organism to the natural death of an organism, and this time period is called the life span of an organism. So students, this lifespan can be so short, like if we take the example of butterfly, it can live only for 1 or 2 weeks, whereas in plants there are like rice plant and many other plants. Other than some individuals or some living organisms can live for a long period of time, like a banyan tree, it can survive for thousands of years, whereas like some animals like tortoise can live for 100 to 150 years of age. So what we can see that whatever be the lifespan, each and every individual has to die one day, means the death is certain. But students, here interesting thing is only this, that all the individuals will die one day, but whether their lifespan is for a short period of time, where it is a long period of time. Other than the students, lifespan is not correlated with the sizes of an organism. As if you see that crow and parrot, they both are of same size, but crow can only survive for 15 years of age, whereas parrot can survive for 100 to 150 years of age. If we take the example of crocodile, so crocodile can survive for 60 years of age, as it is so huge, whereas if we take the example of tortoise, so it can live for 100 to 150 years of age, as it is so small as compared to a crocodile. So here what we have seen, that a body size is not correlated with the lifespan of an organism. Other than the students, all these explanation shows that no individual is immortal on this earth except single cell. So why do we say that a single cell organism are immortal? Because what happens here only cell division is the mode of reproduction in an organism. Like if we take the example of amoeba, and the example is binary fission. So what happens there? Here nucleus stretches, and after that nucleus is divided into two nuclei, and it is followed by the body. So after a fission, amoeba divides into two daughter cells. So here individual do not die, instead it is divided into two nuclei. So we can say here cell division is mode of reproduction. Other than this, if you see, there is a vast number of animals we can see on this earth. From thousands of years they are surviving, as like many plants, organisms, animals, human beings, they are surviving for a long period of time. So there must be some process that can lead their continuity of species on this earth. So students, this process is called the reproduction. So all the living organisms reproduce of its own kind. So what we can say, that why do they all these? Because so that species does not perish from this earth. So students, what would happen if new individuals were not born from their parent? So what would happen? There will be no life on this earth. So because of that, all the living organisms reproduce. So the ability of living organisms to produce of its own kind is called the reproduction. So reproduction means they are producing again and of its own kind. Like a human being will give birth to their baby, cat will give birth to a cat, dog will give birth to a dog, elephant will give birth to a elephant, whereas mango tree will again grow in a mango tree only. So this is a process which ensures the continuity of species on this earth. So students, what we can say, that reproduction is a biological process. As students, we have discussed about many life processes like respiration, circulation, digestion, excretion. So all these are the system all these life processes are very much important for the survival of an organism. They work simultaneously inside of our body. But students, what would happen if a single life process does not work properly? So it can lead to a death of an organism. But it is not with the reproduction. Reproduction only ensures the continuity of species, of its own kind of species from generation to generation. So what is this? What is reproduction? So it retains a particular species of a living organism, like as human being gives birth to a human being, elephant will give birth to an elephant, other than this monkey will give birth to a monkey. So what we can say, it retains a particular species of living organism from generation to generation. Other than this, it also leads to the transmission of characters from one generation to another generation. Students, as if there are father and mother, and if mother has straightened black hair and black eyes, whereas father has a curly brown hair and brown eyes. So what happens? The new individual who will born, who can get the few characteristics from their father, like brown and curly hair, whereas he can get few characters from mother, like black eyes. So what happens here? It leads to the transmission of characters from one generation to the another generation. Other than this, variation also leads to a new species. So students, what you can see, that if a new individuals are born from their parents, so they get few characteristics from their father and few characteristics from their mother. But what happens? Sometimes they get some different kind of characteristics which can accumulate, and after some time it can give rise to a new species. Like we can take the example of, we can take the example of parents. So sometimes what happens, if mother has brown eyes and a father has black eyes, maybe the individual which will born, he can get the blue eyes. So what we have seen, that here blue eyes is not the characteristics of their parent. So after some time, this variation leads to a new species. So what we have seen, that reproduction ensures that retains a particular species of living organism. Other than this, it also helps in the transmission of characters from one generation to another generation. Other than this, variation leads to a new species. Other than the students, each organism reproduces of its own kind, as we have earlier discussed. And other than this, there are many factors which affects the reproduction. It can be a season, nutrition, and a breeding availability. Other than, it also depends on the individual to individual. So students, on the base of reproduction can be of two types, like asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So students, if we talk about the asexual reproduction, so here only single parent is involved in the process of a new individual. So because of that, the new individuals are identical to their parents. Now, if we talk about the sexual reproduction, so what happens here? It involves the two parents. So the individuals who born, they get the characteristics of both the parents. So students, let us start with the asexual reproduction in organisms.
No more spending your energy and money on coaching classes, or missing classes for rain, for rally, and any other nonsense. Subjects covered by multiple teachers with repeat telecasts. Doubts, concepts, applications, no problem. All explained through great and significant animation. So sit back comfortably in your home and watch Study Spectrum TV channel.
Now, asexual reproduction. So students, what is here? Here single individual or single parent is involved in the process of new individual. So what we can say, that new individuals who born from their single parents, they are the copies of their parent. Another thing, they are identical to their parents. So it can be high, it can be happened in a higher mode of, and it is a higher mode of multiplication, and the new individuals who born can be a clone of their parents, because they are morphologically and physiologically they are completely same to same of their parents. So that's why we can say that the new individuals who born from the single parent can be a clone of their parents, because they are morphologically and physiologically they are similar. If we take the example of protist and monera, the organism or parent cell divides to give rise to a new individual. Here what we can see that cell division is in itself a mode of reproduction, as it can be binary fission, fragmentation, budding, or spore formation and regeneration. So students, let us start with the binary fission. So if I say the fission means splitting. So what happens here? We have seen the example of amoeba. Here nucleus stretches and divided into a two daughter cells. Other than this, if we take the example of budding, so it can happen in a hydra or yeast. So if we take the example of hydra, what happens? Here outgrowths coming from the parent body, and this in the form of bulb. And when this outgrowth gets mature, it can give rise to a new individual. Whereas in yeast cell, the buds like structure form, and when they get mature, they detach from the parents, and each of the bud form to a new individual. Other than this, if we take the example of fragmentation, so if we see the slimy patches in a water, if you can see pond and lake, there are greeny patches. So what are these? These are the algae, and when these algae get the favorable conditions, they these fragments divided into a filaments, and each filaments give rise to a new individual. So this is that example of fragmentation in Spirogyra. Now if we take the now the next is regeneration. So what the students, as we have seen, where cell division takes place, but regeneration is a kind of, we can say this is a kind of accidental kind of reproduction. When we cut these kind of organisms into a pieces, so each and every piece can give rise to a new individual. Example, we can take the planaria. So it was all about the regeneration. Other than this, spore formation is also a kind of asexual reproduction. So what happens here? As we have seen the example of bread mold. So what happened there? These spores are present in the air, and when they get the favorable conditions like wet and warm, humid conditions, these spores land on the particular dead and decaying matter, and they start germinating. So there is a filament like structure. Above that there is a node like structure where these spores are present in the covering of sporangium. So this covering is important to protect the spores from the unfavorable conditions. So students, these are the examples of asexual reproduction in a single celled organisms. Other than this, members of fungi and algae also reproduce through their special asexual structure, like conidia in penicillium, zoospores in sponges. So it was all about the examples of asexual reproduction. Other than this, students, you must have learned about the water hyacinth. Have you heard about the Bengal terror? So this is the water hyacinth that we say Bengal terror. So why do we say them a Bengal terror? Because this is a foreign weed. It is an invasive kind of weed, and it germinates in a standing water. And it was introduced in India because of its beautiful structure, blue colored flower, and a shape of leaf. So these are it looks very beautiful to see, but it is very difficult to stop the growth of the water hyacinth. So because of that, what they do, they withdraws the oxygen from the water, and this can lead to a death of a fishes. These invasive weeds compete with the local weeds and grow in a higher number. So it is because of that they withdraw the oxygen from the water. So because of that, we say that it is a Bengal terror. students, you must have learned about the vegetative reproduction in plants. So students, what do you think? In vegetative, it is also a vegetative reproduction is also a kind of asexual reproduction. And why should we say so? These are also that a clone is also appropriate for the vegetative propagation. So students, as you must have studied about this in your previous classes, in plants, the units of vegetative propagules such as runner, rhizome, tuber of root, shoot, bulb are all capable of giving rise to a new individual. These are the closed structures and these are called the vegetative propagules in the plant. So these structures do not involve two parents. That's why we say that it is a asexual kind of reproduction, because new individuals only evolve from the vegetative part of the plant, as we have taken the example of runner, rhizome, tuber of root, shoot, bulb. So students, if we take the example of stem tuber potato, so here what happens, basal underground stem produce axillary branches, and these axillary branches, terminal branches, turn to store starchy food, and these swollen tips are called the stem tuber. So these stem tuber has notches on its surface, and this is called the eye. So these eye is actually present at the node of the stem. So when these eyes get the favorable conditions, these eyes sprouts and give rise to a new individual. Other than this, students, if we cut the potato into a small pieces with their eyes, they can also give rise to a new individual. Other than this, if we talk about the tuber root, so we can see this in the dahlia or in a sweet potato. So what happens? Here terminal axillary buds are formed, and these axillary buds are sprouts to form the leafy shoot. And when these leafy shoots slips, they can give rise to a new individual. Other than this, if we cut these like sweet potato and dahlia, that is a stored form of root, so they can also give rise, and sown it into a damp soil, they can also give rise to a new individual. Other than this, if we take the example of runners, so here the example is cynodon or doob grasses. So if you see any ground, you can see the patches of green grasses. So these are the doob. So what happens here? Actually, these branches creeps horizontally, and when they get come in a contact with the damp soil, each node can give rise to a new individual. Other than this, rhizome of ginger, we can cut it from nodes and internodes, and if we grow it into a damp soil, so can give rise to a new individual. Other than this, bryophyllum, so they in a bryophyllum leaves, there are notches present on their margin. These are called the foliar buds, and when these foliar buds, if fall down in a damp soil, they can also produce to a new organism, new individual. So students, it was all about the natural kind of vegetative propagation. Other than the students, a man also takes the advantage of this vegetative part of a plant. As if we like these method can be a cutting, grafting, or a layering. So if we talk about the cutting, so it is the simplest method. As what they do, can take the example of sugar cane or roses. So they cut the branches from the nodes and internodes and sown it into the soil, and these branches give rise to a new plant. Other than this, if we talk about the grafting, so mostly it is used in a horticulture. What they do, they graft two stems of the plants, and mostly it is important for the fruits. Because of this, we can get the hybrid fruits. So what they do, they just graft the healthy branch of another stem to a rooted branch of another stem, and after some time these branches grow and give rise to a different kinds of fruits. Other than this, if we take the example of layering, so what happens there? Here a stem is bent towards the soil, and when this stem come and they have nodes and internodes present in their stem. So when these stems come in the contact with damp soil, they give to a new individual. So students, it was all about the artificial propagation, that is also a kind of asexual kind of reproduction. So students, what we have seen in vegetative propagation, here we have seen, you can notice that all arise from the nodes present in the modified stem of the plants. And when these nodes come in a contact with the damp soil, they produce a new plant. So students, it was all about the vegetative propagation. So where we have seen nodes are present in the plants, when they come in a contact with damp soil, they give rise to a new individual. Now students, what we have seen, that asexual reproduction in common matter of reproduction in organisms that have relatively a simple organization. Now let us start with the sexual reproduction. So students, if we talk about the sexual reproduction, so as we know that in sexual reproduction what happens, you must have studied about in previous classes, like two individuals are involved in the process of sexual reproduction, and here the fusion of male and female gametes takes place. Students, if we discuss the sexual mode of reproduction, so it is an elaborate, complex and a very slow process as compared to a asexual reproduction. Here it takes time, and the new individuals who born from their parents, they are not identical to their parents. Why? As we have seen in asexual reproduction, here only a single parent was involved. That's why the new individuals who were born from their parents are identical to their parents. They are cloned to their parents. But here, as two individuals are involved, they are not identical to their parents. So what are the advantages of sexual reproduction? As we have seen that asexual reproduction is a higher mode of multiplication. Here new individuals born in a very high number. So as if we talk about the sexual reproduction, as it is a slow process, but it is important. So what are these advantages? So they incorporate variations in species. As earlier we have discussed that what kind of variations happened, like when new individuals born from their parents, like we have taken the example of parents. So when these new individuals born from their parents, like they have sometimes, suppose that a mother has black eyes and a father has brown eyes. So sometimes what happens, when that new individual born, he can maybe get the blue eyes. So this is a kind of variation. He must be a different from their parent. Each individual in a species has its own uniqueness. As students, if you see suppose that there are parents and you can see the three, and they have three kids. So what you will see, that all the three kids are different to each other. As if we are not talking about the identical twins, but if you can see that all the kids looks different. They have their own uniqueness. Some maybe have a curly hair, some maybe of a good height, maybe some individual have a small height. So what we can say, that each individual in a species has its own uniqueness. And other than this, it enables organisms to survive under unfavorable conditions. So why it happens? As if you take the example of dogs or bears. So species is a dog, but we can see a different kind of dogs, like Alsatian, Pomeranian. Some have a long hair, some have a spotted body, some look so huge, whereas some are so small. So these are the variations. So students, sometimes these variations are good for the survival of an individual. As if we take the example of bear, so if you see the polar bear, so its body has a long white hair, and their feet is so padded, whereas if we take the example of normal bear, so it has a small hair. So what happens after some time, suppose that some unfavorable condition created, like a very icy weather, so the individual who can survive in this kind of icy condition, like very individual can survive even in extreme cold. So the what we can say, because of this, species can survive from generation to generation because of these variations. So sometimes these variations leads to a good thing. Students, as we have discussed about the advantages of sexual reproduction, so students, as you know that all organisms have to reach at a certain age of growth and maturity in their life, then only they can reproduce sexually. Like, as you must have studied about it in a previous classes, like if we take the example of human beings, so what happens in sexual reproduction, all that, like a child has to reach at the age of puberty, that is a sexual reproductive maturity. So there are few phases like juvenile phase, reproductive phase and senescent phase. So if we talk about the juvenile phase, so this is a phase of growth and it is called the juvenile phase. Reproductive phase, so it is reproductive phase followed the juvenile phase. Other than this, what is senescent phase? So it is what we can say, this is an end of reproductive phase. So these are the phases like juvenile phase. Juvenile phase is a period of growth of an individual at a certain age. Mostly if we take the example of human beings, so it is near about, it starts from after 11 or 12. Sometimes it is also varies from individual to individual, like reproductive phase. So reproductive phase followed the juvenile phase. This is the age of reproductive maturity where an organism can sexually reproduce. So if we talk about the girls, so here one girls become mature earlier than boys, as from 1 or 2 years, and it starts at the age of, mostly it starts at the age of 13 or 14 years. Now let us start with the juvenile phase. So the end of juvenile phase, which is marks the beginning of reproductive phase. So what we can say, it can be easily seen in a higher plants when they come to the flower. So it also depend on the based upon the flowering and fruiting pattern of the plant. Suppose that if we take the example of monocarpic plants. So what are the monocarpic plants? Monocarpic plants are the plants who flowers once in his life cycle. It can be annual, biennial or perennial. Like annual, we can take the example of rice, wheat and marigold. Whereas if we take in a biennial, radish. Other than this, it can be a perennial like bamboo species. So what happens here? Here flower only flowers once in his life cycle. Like suppose that rice and wheat. So here they grow, they mature, and after that they flower. So flower is a reproductive phase in a plant. Here we are taking the example of angiosperm plants. So what are the angiosperm plants? These are the flowering plants. So here the flowers here plant grows, matures, and he flowers and then he dies. Suppose that if we take there are some species, like if we take the example of bamboo species, so it flowers one in his life cycle at the age of 50 to 100 years, and after that they die. Other than this, there is one more interesting example is a Strobilanthes kuntiana. It's like Neela Kuranji. So this is a flowers which flowers once in a 12 years, and they are found in a Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. So these flowers are going to will be flower mostly in a 2017 and 18. So students, what we have seen in monocarpic plants, where a flower once in his life cycle, it is very easily we can clarify that vegetative, reproductive and the senescent phase. So students, if we take the example of Strobilanthes kuntiana, that is a Neela Kuranji. So these flowers once in his life cycles in a 12 years of age. So as you must have heard about, they were flowered in a 2006. And they are found in an area of Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Now they are going to flower in a 2017 or 2018. So it was all about the monocarpic plants. So here if we talk about the monocarpic plants, so whether they are annual, biennial or perennial, but it is very easy to identify the phases like juvenile phase, reproductive phase and a senescent phase. Like the flower, when a plant comes to flower, this will be the reproductive phase, whereas when they die, after that they die. So this will be the senescent phase. But if we take the example of polycarpic plants, so polycarpic means they flowers many times in their life cycle. As if we take the example of mango tree, so there are some trees like mango tree, jackfruit tree, coconut tree. These are the plants which flowers many times. They are the seasonal flowers. Like as we take the example of mango, we get it in a season, like in summer seasons. So here what we have seen, they flower seasonally. Other than this, if we take the example of rosa sinensis, so this is also a perennial plants, and it can flower throughout the year. So students, in these kind of plant, it is really difficult to find out the vegetative, reproductive and senescent phase. So students, in some plants have flowering occurs more than once. So what would you call? It is a interflowering period. So what we will say, whether it is a juvenile phase or a matured phase. So students, here we are discussing about the polycarpic plants. So what happens here, you have seen that they flowers many times in their life cycle. But what we can say, that once they reproduce in their life cycle, so after that they goes into a recovery phase, and they again become to they are going to flower again. So this period will be called the mature phase of the plant. So it was all about the plants. So other than the students, can you list the changes in a human beings that are indicative of reproductive maturity? So now we are going to discuss about the reproductive maturity in human beings. So students, you must have heard in a previous classes like what is reproductive maturity. So when girl or boy reaches at the age of puberty, so because of that, what happens, the endocrine gland like ovary and testis, they are stimulated by the pituitary gland. So it releases a hormone, testosterone or estrogen. So because of that, these hormones leads to a development of secondary sexual characteristics in male and female. Like testis releases the hormone testosterone, and it is helpful in the development of secondary sexual characteristics in male, whereas ovaries releases the hormone estrogen and progesterone, which is responsible for the secondary development of secondary sexual characteristics in females. So what are these changes? Like if we take the example of boys, changes in voice. Other than this, their shoulders become wide, broader, and chest become more wider. Other than this, we can see the mustaches, beard and facial hairs. So these are the reproductive maturity in our boys. Other than this, in girls, breast development, the area below the pelvic region becomes more wider, menstruation cycle. So all these are the secondary sexual characteristics in male and female at the age of reproductive maturity. So other than the students, there are many animals like birds, frogs, lizards. They are the seasonal breeders. Here animals like the birds living in nature, it also lays the eggs in a season. But if we talk about the placental mammals, so it exhibit the cyclical changes in the activity of ovaries and the accessory ducts of ovaries. So what happens here, other than this, a hormone also plays a very important role in the secondary sexual characteristics or reproductive maturity or these cyclical activities in a male and female during the reproductive phase. So students, there are two kind of cycle. One is estrous cycle and another one is a menstrual cycle for the females. So if we take the example of in non-primate placental mammals, so what happens, like cows, cat, sheep, rat, deers, etc. These such cyclical changes during reproduction is called the estrous cycle. So this estrus means sexual excitement. Here what happens, endometrium lining of uterus absorbed. So no bleeding occurs in these placental mammals. It occurs, and it occurs only in a breeding season. So what we have seen, that these cyclical changes occurs only in the breeding season, and usually it continues throughout the life. But if we take the example of primates like human beings, apes and monkeys, it is called the menstrual cycle in females. So it occurs throughout the reproductive phase, and hence it is called they are called the continuous breeders. So what happens here? Here endometrium line shed off. What happens when one of the ovary releases an ovum? So what happens at that time, the uterus line becomes more thickened to receive that egg. So when this egg fertilizes with the sperm, so it leads to a pregnancy. But when this ovum does not fertilize with any sperm, so because of that, these uterus lining along with ovum and blood vessels shed off. So because of that, bleeding occurs. So usually it takes this cycle takes at least 21 to 38 days to repeat, and it remains for the 4 to 6 days in females. So it was all about the reproductive phases in mammals, placental mammals like primates and non-prime primates. So now take this, what is senescence old? So students, as we all grow old, but when if we live long enough, so it's something that we recognize. So what is the question is, why old? It is that, so what is this? This is an end of reproductive phase and can be considered as one of the parameters that changes occurs, like slowing of metabolism, and old age ultimately leads to the death. So this is the senescent phase of the life cycle. So students, what we have discussed here, we discussed about the juvenile phase, reproductive phase and the senescent phase of an organism. So if we talk about the plants and animals, here hormones also play a very important role in these life cycle phases. Now, let us start with the events in a sexual reproduction. So students, so what are these events? The events of sexual reproduction is a very elaborate and complex, and it's follow a regular sequence. As we all know that it is a slow process and there are few sequence which it is followed. So what are these? If it is characterized by the three phases. One, fusion of male and female gametes. The next one is a formation of zygote, and the next process is embryogenesis. So what are, if we take about the so these are the events like pre-fertilization event, fertilization and a post-fertilization events. So students, as we have seen that there are three events: pre-fertilization events, fertilization and a post-fertilization events. So let us start with the pre-fertilization events. So what are these? There are, so the two main pre-fertilization events are gametogenesis and a transfer of gamete. So let us start with the gametogenesis. So what is this term says? Gametogenesis means it refers to the process of formation of male and female gametes. And students, these gametes are always the haploid cells. As if we take the example of algae like Cladophora or Chlamydomonas. So here gametes are similar in appearance. It is really difficult to identify whether the gamete is a male gamete or female gametes. So that's why they are called the homogametes or isogametes. However, in majority of sexual reproducing organisms, gametes produced, and they are the morphologically, physiologically, they are very much different. That's why they are called the heterogametes. Let us take the example of gametes of human beings. So students, as we take the example of human beings, so here a male gamete is a sperm, and it is a highly motile structure, and it is divided into head, middle piece and tail. And what is an interesting thing, that the gametes are produced in a larger number and they are very smaller in size. Whereas if we talk about the egg or ovum, so it is larger in size and very smaller in number. So these are called the heterogametes. So here we have discussed about the examples of homogametes and isogametes. So in homogametes, both the gametes have a similar structure. So because of that only we cannot identify whether the organism is whether the gamete is a male gamete or a female gamete. But in heterogamete, we can easily identify the gametes as the sperms or male gametes are very smaller in size and larger in number, and ovum or egg is a larger in size and very smaller in number. Now, sexuality in organisms. So students, it involves the fusion of male and female gametes. What happens from two, so here how two different individuals, but what we can say, it is not always true. Like if we take the example of self-fertilization. So what happens here, as we take the example of China rose. So here what we can say, hibiscus rosa sinensis, here male and female gametes are present on the same flower. Other than this, if we take the example of unisexual plant, so what happens here, both male and female gametes flowers are present in the same plant. In several fungi plants, it is homothallic and monoecious. So it denotes the bisexual condition of the plant. Other than this, if we take the example of heterothallic or dioecious, so these terms used to denote the unisexual condition of a plant. In flowering plants, where male flower is, if we take the example of male flower, so it is a staminate and it is bearing the stamens, while a female is called the pistillate and it is bearing a pistil. So monoecious plants are examples like cucurbits. So here what happens, male and female flowers are present in a different plant. Now if we take the example, so it was all about the plants. So examples can be coconut, cucurbits, etc. But what about animals? So most of the animals are unisexual. As we all know that male reproductive part is in a different individual and female reproductive part is in a different individual. But there are some species also present in animals which possess both the organs. Examples, earthworm, leeches and tapeworm. So because of that, they are called the hermaphrodites. Now, so it was all about the sexuality in organisms, in plants and animals. Now, cell division during gamete formation. So students, as earlier I have told you that all the gametes are haploid cells. So students, what happens here? All heterogametes have two types of gametes. It can be a male and a female. Now, gametes always have haploid through the whether it is a parent plant body from which they arise, may be a haploid or it can be a diploid. Like the gamete will be always haploid, whether it is developed from the haploid plant or a diploid plant. So haploid means n in number and diploid means 2n in number. Now haploid parent produces gametes by a mitotic division. So what we can say, that meiosis doesn't occur in a haploid parent. Why? Like organisms belonging to fungi, monera, algae and bryophytes have a haploid parent. Whereas gymnosperms, like what is gymnosperm? The plants who bear seeds, and angiosperms. So and in human beings and animals, parent's body is diploid. So what happens here? Diploid organisms have a specialized cell called the myocytes. So these are the gamete mother cell undergo the meiotic division. At the end of meiosis, the chromosomes which are formed, they are haploid in numbers. So students, if we talk about anybody's life cycle, so here what happens? Diploid chromosomes becomes haploid by the process of meiosis, and then they frozen together and again they become a diploid. So in diploid organisms, specialized cells called the myocytes, what happens here? The gamete mother cell undergo a meiosis. At the end of meiosis, only one set of chromosome gets incorporated into a new gamete. Now, gamete transfer. So students, as here we have discussed about the cell division through gametes forms in a haploid number. Now, if we talk about the gamete transfer, so after formation of male and female gametes, these male and female gametes must be physically brought together to facilitate the process of fertilization. So if we talk about the male gametes, so majority of male gamete is motile in nature, so except few algae and fungi, like what we have seen. As we have taken the example of Chlamydomonas, there we have seen that both the gametes are motile. But in majority of organism, what happens? Only a male gamete is motile, whereas a female gamete is stationary. So as they are motile, they need medium through which the male gamete can move. So as for the fusion, male gamete has to reach the female gamete as they are motile. Like as we take the example of some algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes. So here the medium is water through which gametes transfer takes place, and there are larger number. But what happens, as the water is vulnerable for the predators, so because of that, large number of male gametes fail to reach the female gamete.